One of the big things that's never talked about when you have an alcoholic in your family and coming from the family perspective like mine is, and if this is the first time seeing me again, my wife passed away from alcohol use disorder a little over 5 years ago, and we were married for 25 years. And I can remember, the last few years of her life. My mother died in 2015. That was the last time my wife went there until really the end. But I used to put her into a rehab facility. I used to go back in the summertime because my father was back there, and I knew he didn't have a whole lot of time. He was in his mid 80s. And for me to fly home, even to spend 2 weeks, I would have to place my wife into a rehab facility. And usually it was a situation where she needed to go. She'd been drinking for a long period of time. And I would have to say, intervene, like, we're putting you in there. And then I'd go buy airplane tickets so my son and I could go see my family. I wasn't able to take her because it was too much of an outrageous situation. If you've ever listened to the stories that happened when my mother died, she cleared out my dad's liquor cabinet, for example. So I could no longer take her back to see my family, and I didn't want to subject my family with her disease. So you have to make a lot of changes in arrangements around the disease, and there's a whole lot more to follow. And again, I make these videos for awareness, number one, education. They really have nothing to do with me at this point. I mean, after 5 years, these stories have nothing to do with me. There is no animosity. There never really was. I mean, when she did things like drive through the house drunk and passed out, of course you're angry and frustrated at the time, but you also have time, in retrospect, to look back, and it was a mental illness, and I knew it was a mental illness then. So family have to take that into perspective. And it's so important to have that understanding, okay? Because that's how you have to approach it as a disease. And you have to take your reactionary emotions out of it. But, back to, having to rearrange your life. I mean, things like I could never have alcohol in the house, ever. In fact, I remember the first time after my wife passed away. I know these are little things, but they're things that are important because families have to go down this road. I bought a 12-pack of beer. And I don't even drink beer much, but I remember putting it in the garage refrigerator, and I came home from work, and I remember walking out into the garage, opened the door, and the beer was still there. And it was the weirdest feeling, because if my wife had been alive, if I'd put a 12-pack of beer in the refrigerator, it would have been gone within an hour. It would have been vaporized. And it's amazing, all the just things you have to dance around when you have an alcoholic in your family. And then, of course, there are the things that you cannot do. You can't go over to friends' houses anymore because your wife is going to drink herself into oblivion. One of her really good friends used to invite us for Thanksgiving. Her and her whole family had a wonderful family. But they used to go for Thanksgiving, they would go to a casino. It was called Pechanga Casino, and the whole family would get together. She had friends from the north, and they'd always invite Amanda and myself over. And it was just terrifying for me because Amanda would she'd get plastered. And granted, we were at a bar, but it was just like what she lived for. And I really would just go just to make sure she didn't make a fool of herself. And, these are adjustments that you have to do when you have an alcoholic in the family, and eventually you just won't go anymore. And it's a perfect example of, what family has to go through. They become a caretaker, and it's not about the social events are no longer fun. It's just about making sure the person doesn't hurt themselves, put other people in harm's way, or make a complete fool out of themselves. And that's no way to enjoy life. And then as a family member or as a spouse, you realize how isolating that it becomes because so many friends that you once have will fall along the wayside. And they're not going to text you and say, we're not going to see you anymore. They're just not going to show up anymore, or they're not going to respond because they don't want to be around an alcoholic anymore. And being a spouse of one or being a family member of an alcoholic, it can become very isolating because you realize, those deep friendships that you've had for, years or decades, they can go away because people don't want to be around it, quite frankly. And it's not subconscious. I mean, I was aware of it. But I end up, what you have to do as a family member is you have to adjust, and you just really have to kind of create your own life outside the family or outside the marriage. You have to reinvent yourself just as much as the alcoholic does. And this video is really about the family members. I mean, you need to have activities, physical activity. You have to have something creative you do, just like the alcoholic does. And you need to have relationships outside of the marriage or outside of the family. Very important. Because you don't want to get caught up in it, and you don't want to get too isolated and too caught up in the disease itself. And again, the book is called Amanda, A Cautionary Tale of Alcoholism. It's the story of my wife's 25-year decline with alcohol use disorder, and ultimately she passed away February 21st of 2020, so it's been almost 5 years. A pretty grisly story. It's really made for awareness. It's for recovering alcoholics to make sure they stay in that lane and stay recovered. For alcoholics to realize, the effect that they have on their family, and certainly for family members to realize and be able to put in perspective that their family member has a mental health disease and it needs to be approached as one. And you need to take out the reactionary emotions and the anger and the frustration. That'll come, but you have to approach it correctly and get them the correct professional and individual help that they so desperately need. And again, I'll go live Monday through Friday right around 6 o'clock Pacific time, 9 o'clock Eastern time. The Facebook group is called There's an Alcoholic in the Family, and we have another one called Amanda, A Cautionary Tale of Alcoholism. Both groups, just join one. And when you're ready to work with me one-on-one, click on the link above, schedule a breakthrough call. The call is free. The coaching program is definitely not, but if you want to change your life and the life of your family, set up a call, and we'll talk soon. Thanks so much for listening.